right, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. Really excited to be here. I'm a TTP LiveTeach instructor, full-time GMAT specialist since 2016. This is a really exciting topic. One of my favorites actually, holds a special place in my heart. The first work I actually did for TTP, after taking their course and scoring 780 a couple years ago, they asked me to help with the reading comprehension. And so I was heavily involved in writing the course for that, along with the rest of the team. And so, but a lot of the stuff in the course is kind of my special sauce, I feel like, with the sniping and a lot of the things we'll get into, making it more formulaic, because a lot of people have trouble with the reading comp and feel like, oh, do I just read more? Not really. I mean, that can help, and certain, skills that you already have can help, of course, but there's a ton of specific things you can do to make it more mathematical, more formulaic, specific things you can notice and do to really notice the traps that are going on, have a really efficient process, and I think you're going to get a lot out of today. One question, what I see, and definitely encourage you to be really active in the chat. I want to make this as fun as possible and engaging. Love answering your questions. There was a question about the class recording after, and actually, no, this is just for you who are here, who made the time to be here. So I encourage you to pay close attention. You can take screenshots if you want, of some of the slides. And of course, I am teaching a LiveTeach course. So, would love if you do decide to join us for that. I will put a link here. That does start in Monday, this same time, Mondays and Wednesdays, starting next Monday. We still do have some spots, although it is filling up. And let's see here. I'm going to drop in the chat that link. Let me know if there's any questions about the LiveTeach. But yeah, also I encourage you today to, especially since you don't have the recording, really think about what are your top takeaways. That's definitely super helpful in general. What can you put into action right away in your prep? And this is going to be interactive too. So I'm going to give you questions after I go through some basics, and we're going to have the poll feature up. So you're going to get a chance to practice the skills. That's something that I really is a big part of my style, is to put you to the test, challenge you, and you're going to make mistakes and learn from them. One other thing I do want to point out as an announcement is I did do a webinar that good reception last Wednesday. There's a lot of mindset tips. It's called Master GMAT Verbal, but a lot of it applies to all the tests. So I encourage everyone to check that out. A lot of good mindset stuff, a lot of great feedback on that. And yeah, I'm excited about this Focus Edition. I'd be curious in the chat how many people are taking Focus Edition versus the original. I've tried 5 times to get the perfect 800, but now I have a chance of getting the 805. So I probably will be taking the new one at some point, ideally as soon as possible. And like to put myself in your shoes, practicing all the mindset things, mindfulness and precision and all that as well. All right, well, let's jump in. One thing I was just going to start off is this is my own research from a bunch of practice tests I took. If you were curious, like what are some of the differences between the classic and the current, that is a topic people are chattering about. The data sufficiency did go down from 23% to only 10%, so that's pretty interesting. Of course, you don't have the sentence correction anymore, and taking its place in the main score, you have a lot of these data insights, integrated reasoning. So you got 2-part analysis, multi-source reasoning, graphs and tables, taking up 20-some%. And then reading comp actually gets a little bit more because the sentence correction is gone, so that's a little bit extra important. And it will take between 10 to 14 questions. There was one recent test, actually, they only had 10, but it's averaged about 13. Cool. All right, so now we're getting into the habits here. So number one, this is a really huge one, and I see people, today, a good question is today for GMAT Focus or original version. This would apply to both because it is reading comp. And in reading comp, there really isn't any significant differences. Both tests have about 13 or 14 questions. Yeah, I did see 10 on a recent Focus Edition, but it's generally about the same number of questions. Yeah. Cool. So this is like probably the biggest thing. Number one, be able to prove your answer is correct. Because when I see people making mistakes, it's like, oh, you ask them why did you choose that one? Well, I don't really know. It just kind of felt right, and the other ones didn't feel right. Well, your feeling. We can't really go on feelings. We have to go on strong reasoning, or more specifically, we have to go on what's in the passage, because um, it's not about it's going to be really concrete. I was going to say one difference between critical reasoning. There is a little bit of overlap, but it tends to be more like a little bit more real world thinking in the critical reasoning in terms of what might not some other thing outside of the passage that would affect the argument, and connecting multiple things. There is a little bit of that in the reading comp, connecting things. There can be a strength and weaken question, but for the most part, we're just finding what's in there. And so we just have to be able to, here's another way of thinking about it. If, a good way to know you're going to get it correct is when you get to where you can cite specific language in the passage and prove it to someone else. So you could like imagine you're an attorney and be like, the contract says right here, this is the answer, that kind of thing. Another question I just noticed came in, is one test harder than the other on advice on which one to take? There is a little bit of speculation that maybe the verbal felt a little bit easier on the new one, but it's not really clear cut here. And it's pretty similar. I'd say it feels pretty similar. One of the big differences is no sentence correction. So if that was a strong suit, then maybe the old version is good. But the data insights, once you get used to it, can feel challenging at first, but we have a really, really detailed course, and all the chapter tests are coming out within the next week. So there's a really detailed course on that, and some of the questions can feel easier on the data insights once you really have a good strategy for it. Not to say that it's easy, but if you have a good plan of attack for each type of question, it may just be finding the info, because you got all these graphs and stuff and tables, and it's more about finding the info rather than the sentence correction gets like really deep. So it's kind of a personal preference. And then in terms of timeline, one thing about the Focus Edition is Harvard and Wharton are not accepting it round 1, round 2. And yeah, calculator still allowed on data insights. And yep. And then I guess data sufficiency is also a lot lower. So looking at that chart I showed, if you do want to screenshot it again, this is the data here. I'll leave that up for a second here. So that gives you a sense. Yeah. In terms of timeline, November 7th, the new one comes out, and then it will go away. The classic one they say early 2024, but it's not totally clear, the exact timeline. Last I checked a few days ago, you could still register 6 months from now, so like the end of March. But who knows if that's actually even accurate for sure, because I don't necessarily trust GMAT 100%. Yeah. All right, so yeah, first reading. This is a really key thing. Do not try to memorize or focus on the details. I see a lot of people get caught up in this trap of like, okay, say we have an average of 2 minutes per question, and we only have, it's actually a little bit less than that, because 23 questions, 40, yeah, slightly less. And I'm gonna actually get that exact time for you. It's right here, Focus Edition. Yeah, 1:57. So it's right about 2 minutes. But if say you spent 4 minutes on a passage and there's 3 questions, then you only have 40 seconds each to answer those questions, and to really answer them correctly in general. I mean, there may be some that you remember from the passage, but most of the time, if it's a harder question, you're gonna have to go back to the passage, and that's a better approach. So I generally encourage a bit less time on the first reading and leaving more time, because there is a fixed amount of time in the end. It is okay to slow down as you're going through the process and getting used to it. But at some point, you are going to have to get to that test pace and pacing. And I generally encourage more time actually on the questions themselves, and when going straight back to the passage and comparing between the passage and the answer choices. So therefore, on that first reading, it's be curious and engage. For whatever reason, I was taking like 3 practice tests this last 4 days, and I really was able to get into that mindset of curiosity. I feel like it helped a ton. Maybe the passages did feel more interesting for whatever reason, but if you can get into that curious mode, it's one of the best mindsets, obviously, in general in life. But that curious approach throughout all your prep, and that positive approach of like, oh, how long of a streak can I get today, and making it a game for yourself, because this can feel like a grind. There is a lot of material, especially if you have a long score increase to a large score increase you need. So yeah, instead of focusing on details, main ideas, tone, structure. We'll talk more about where do you find the main ideas. So marker words. This is a superpower once you really master this. The first one I learned when I was first prepping 2015 is like the word however. Think of it as like a stop sign, like, and I kind of yell it to myself when I see it. Like it's super common, this word however, and it really signals a main point. It's really common. You'll have like actually combined with an argument conclusion, you'll have this myth marker. So we'll see some of these, but it's like many people believe X, and then it'll be like however, and then it might be the author. Joe believes Y, or it might be or however they're wrong. And actually, with those are actually different, because however they're wrong would be the author has a strong point. And we'll talk more about this, but that we really do need to distinguish between this. However, Joe believes Y. That's different. This would be more descriptive, describing two arguments, and then they're wrong would be strong argument from the author. And we'll show when it comes into the verbs in the primary purpose question, that really is a big distinction, to not mix that up. So anyway, so this idea of like yelling out the word. One thing with reading speed, which is a question I sometimes get, is you don't want to sub-vocalize. So like ideally, like say the words in your head is a common mistake that slows down reading. So, but certain words like a however, I will kind of like yell in my head. These other ones like argues that, believes that. There's a lot of other ones, asserts that, concludes that, thinks that, suggests that. These are really important type words. It is practice to get to where you notice them. It's not like necessarily a matter of memorizing the words, but practicing noticing them. One nice thing about the course is like we went in extreme detail. Like the solutions are extremely detailed in terms of, no, I'm tooting my own horn a little bit. I was proud of how much work we went into. Like every single thing is like, there's vocabulary, there's breaking down by the sentence, the contrast markers in every single sentence, all these markers, the passage itself, like it's extreme detail. So, you may not need all that. You don't necessarily have to read all that, but it's there if you need it. And so that's pretty nice. There's all these tabs for all the different types of analysis. But so by the sentence, anyway, causation or explanation, due to, as a result of, look above markers. So this one's really interesting. This discovery. So it tells us like that we need to look above because of the word this, if we want more detail about the discovery. Or it might be say like such, it might say such something, such problems, right? It might give more above. And then there's this other really common thing. For example, it's supporting a point above. So it might be very common that you have a conclusion and then you have support. And maybe it says, for example, and then it says, moreover, in addition. So really noticing that structure, especially on that first reading, we don't need all those details. We just see, okay, maybe there's one opinion, the author disagrees with that opinion, and then there's like 3 sentences of support. We don't need to spend a ton of time going into all that detail right away, because another way to think about it is the test could be asking like 20, 30 different questions on that passage. There's no way you're going to be able to remember all that detail. You really do need to go back. And it is great. I mean, I did find a few where, on the second, third question, I already had a sense of the answer quickly, but, that's not necessarily going to happen. That would be like an easier question without having to go to the passage. Usually you will, it is better to go back to the passage. All right, so another thing is like a correct answer will often use different words, but with the same meaning. So you could have focusing versus concentrating, or research versus experiments, or this idea of reversed. If the passage says X is more than Y, the correct answer could say Y is less than X. So it's the same meaning. It's mathematically equivalent. There's also an official question that's something like this. It will say scientists. It would say something like, they don't disagree. in the passage. And then it will say, or no, it's actually, sorry, that was the answer. It would say they agree, and then they would say, the answer might say not in dispute, right? So it has the same meaning, agree, and it's like double negative, kind of not in dispute. A lot of times people just don't notice that, but being aware of this like different wording could have the same meaning. And really another huge thing, especially that with that question I'm thinking of, but in general, we're going to talk about is really finding exactly that part, because like, yeah, we'll see like how important it is to really snipe in on exactly what it's asking for. Because if we knew that that was the part to focus on, they agree, then it's so much easier. Like the question was asking specifically about that, you know? So then it's way easier to find the right answer. All right, so primary purpose questions. There's a few good ways to find main ideas. First two sentences of the first paragraph, first sentence of following paragraphs. Probably most commonly have main ideas. It is possible it could come a little later, so maybe it's the second sentence of the second paragraph. You also could look for contrast and conclusion markers and strong language. So maybe that second sentence of the second paragraph says, however, right? And there could also be a conclusion in the final sentence. So we don't necessarily want to skip everything, but put extra emphasis on those for main ideas, looking for them in, because that's just generally the structure of a paragraph, right? Main ideas at the top and then support below. Notice the verbs used. So we're going to go more detail into this. Argumentative versus descriptive. Yeah, we'll talk more about that. So this is actually the bulk of it, is the sniper strategy. They don't really call it that in the course. That's my personal term. I kind of like that aggressive mindset, like sniping and this idea of focus. I actually have a tutor friend that like would channel like an alter ego, like American Sniper was his alter ego. So that's something mindset wise you can think about if there's any like alter ego. There's this really cool book, Alter Ego Effect. It talks about how like one of the classic examples, Beyonce had like Sasha Fierce, and she was shy at first, and then she channeled this inner confidence. There's like Black Mamba for Kobe Bryant, right? It's pretty common. There's a lot of these superstars that channel some alter ego. So, but basically, for the one that's that I think is the most important is like this idea of precision. So for me, I don't necessarily have alter ego, but I say I'm sharp, focused, precise. That's my mantra, and really harping on that. If you notice yourself going off track, like I just say the one word, focusing. But that precision is gonna your biggest factor. Like even still after 8 years at this, my most common error, maybe once or twice that I'm trying to get it down to 0, but out of 64 questions, maybe once or twice I space out a little and make a mistake. So you want to really, really minimize that. That's the highest penalty, is the easier questions too, and careless errors. But back to this sniping. So capitalized words and numbers are easiest to find. We'll go into some examples on this. If there's a long technical word, that's also easier to find. If the question asks about a comparison or disagreement, we need to find both things that are being compared. We'll see an example of that as well. And this sniping skill is really essential. Essentially finding the right information to answer exactly what it's asking. And that can't be understated, of like what exactly is it asking for, and then finding that. All right, so we got trap types. There's actually 2 screens of this. There's like 11 of them. It may seem a little bit like a lot at first, but really just remember, it all boils down to really just one type of trap, one main cause of error. The answer we chose, it doesn't answer the question with clear support from the passage. And these categories, the point of them is just to help us see why. Because as we're doing this, I have this mantra, review, reflect, redo, that I encourage people to use. There's not enough usually, like maybe some people will often review the wrong answers, but maybe they're not spending enough time to really think about why the wrong answers are wrong, why the right answer is right, what proactively, habits-wise, it's really about habits. I'm a huge believer in atomic habits, power habit. Really changed my life like 10 years ago when that really sunk in about habit. Yeah, I would make that in those terms as you do that review, reflect, redo. Okay, what's the habit I'm going to change next time to prevent this error proactively? And then what are the trap types? What did I fall into? Really on a verbal question, we've often made 2 mistakes for every mistake. So we've rejected the correct answer if we're using process of elimination, and also chosen the correct answer. You know, potentially if there's time pressure, generally it's encouraged to, you know, eliminate all the other choices, but reality is sometimes with time pressure, or if your confidence is high enough, I will actually break that rule personally. And if I'm totally confident in a choice, sometimes it can be a little risky. But if there is time pressure, you know, potentially you're totally sure that B is correct, you don't bother with C, D, E. Now you do have to be careful with that. And if you do that to save time, I would say, you know, definitely keep aware of like how often, if it's 1 out of 1,000 that you miss because of that, not such a big deal. But, you know, if you're missing a lot that way, then you got to back off and take more time. Don't rush it. But some of that time pressure stuff, you know, does have some nuance and practice with it. First thing is to just be able to get correct answers. We don't necessarily encourage you to rush it at first. All right, let's see here. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about these traps. Half right's really common. You've got to make sure the entire choice is correct. So say on a primary purpose one, you'll often have a verb, a noun, and a modifier. So it's like argue that, you know, right, something did something, right? And you got to make sure that all 3 parts are correct. We'll talk more about this wrong verb, but that's primary purpose questions mainly. That verb has to match. It could be too narrow. It has to cover the main points of the passage as a whole for primary purpose. And then the rest of these pretty much apply to almost all the question types. Goes beyond what the passage says. So a common one to look for is extreme words. So most versus all. One thing to be aware of is in the markers section of the course, we go into detail about like what's an extreme word versus a qualifier. So extreme words, right? You have like all, every, the most, you know, stuff like that. And then qualifier markers, that just means like softer words. Doubt, like, and so this might be may, might, right? These words, it's way less, they're way looser, right? So it's like everyone won versus like someone. Well, you know, it takes way less evidence for a word like may or might to be correct than an all or every. So both on CR inference or RC inference and detail, definitely like super helpful to notice that. Is it softer language? Is it more vague versus something really strong language? The opposite one, so this one I'd say is super common trap because it like maybe if you're pretty good at the test, you recognize that it's like on the right topic, but it just throws a word like not in there, or it's just backwards in some way. So you might even be on the right track that it's relevant, but it just more versus less, really easy to mix those up. Same thing on quant, like mixing up plus minus signs. I would say in general, like anything that could be done backwards, you got to double check. The other day I was really frustrated with myself. I did a couple mistakes. Like, I mean, these weren't the worst scores. It said 100 percentile, right? 795, right? Sorry. But, you know, still very frustrating. Like I said 5 to 3 and I did 3 to 5, like very frustrating. But, you know, when you make those mistakes, try to like, you know, have some self-compassion, but at the same time, do whatever you can to proactively, like, I wasn't in the right mindset of necessarily, you know, double checking that. Like I double checked the math, but for whatever reason that time I didn't double check the rereading it, what the ratio was. So yeah, anything that could be backwards, like I'm it takes practice, and so you know, definitely be aware of these things. Distortion. Okay, so yeah, so tempting, but not exactly what the passage says. Passage says temporarily, answer says irregular intervals. These aren't necessarily the same thing, or they don't have the same meaning. And I know I go pretty fast, so definitely feel free to stop me if you want any clarification on any of this. That's kind of my style, is to cover as much as I can, but yeah, definitely let me know because I get excited about stuff and really you know, like to cover a lot. Speculation. This is a pretty common one where people think about what's true in reality, or they're getting too much into like real world thinking instead of what's in the passage. Nearby, really common. There's language nearby, but it's not actually answering the question. Wrong comparison, the very common, like there'll be an answer choice that's making a comparison, but it's not. There's a lot of things that could be wrong with a comparison. It's what is being compared. It could be backwards in terms of more or less, or it could be the two things being compared aren't actually compared. So there's kind of like three ways. It could be like the topic, the direction, or the people being the things being compared. So there's like three ways it could be wrong. Oh, I got a couple questions here. So yeah, actually, how about I finish these last two and then I'll come back to the questions. Matches but incorrect. So this is an interesting one. The passage does actually say it, but it doesn't answer the question. There's a little bit of that we may have time for today where, especially on a comparison, maybe one side of the comparison believes something, but we don't know about the other side. So we can't make any assumptions. Then there's this mix-up one that I kind of mentioned where there might be two opinions and then the author's opinion, and those three opinions are getting kind of mixed up in some way. So maybe the author is mixed up with one of the two, or yeah. Always confirm who has which opinion. And let's see. So there's a comment bringing the focus. Yeah, maintaining focus, super important. Yeah, very good comment. Advise against jotting down an outline or notes. So yeah, that's a personal preference. I personally don't. I keep it in my head. It is a personal preference thing. I would say the reason to do it is not necessarily to refer back to it, but I don't necessarily encourage that, like the notes to the level that you would refer back to them. The reason to do it, I would say, is just if it helps you engage with the passage. If it can bring your curiosity up and your attention up, that would be the reason to do it. So, yeah, I would say like the problem with having notes that you're going to come back to is it's like just it may create a distortion. So it's kind of could be telephone game, right? I would rather just go back to exactly what the passage says. And if you're mentally highlighting like what are the important sentences, the howevers, and you get in the habit of that, looking in the right places, you'll make a mental note of what the key points are. And you'll get in the habit of that, and you don't necessarily have to write it in your own words because I mean, if it helps you, it's okay. If it does help you, you can experiment with it. But I'd rather just use the author's exact words. And I mean, you could kind of summarize it in your head. It's like the author disagrees with the common opinion. That's good. That's a good kind of rephrase. It's just like that might be not too much to keep in your head if it's that like kind of like, oh, this is a myth passage. Oh, there's two opinions and the author disagrees with the two opinions. There's two opinions, the author is evaluating the two opinions. You might not require writing it, but if it helps you, definitely go for it. So that's a personal preference. Primary purpose, many of you probably know this. It's why the author took the time to write the passage. What is the main point? What is the, yeah, we'll see more examples of this. So it's predictable language. The most common is the primary purpose is to, one slight difference is like could be primarily concerned with, and then these would be like, instead of like is to explain, it would say explaining, but that's not really a big deal. All right, so this wrong verb one is maybe the most helpful of the traps, so that's why I put it first. So the verbs are what the author's doing. This is something that like was a big unlock for a lot of people. Like even some really hard questions, I've seen people when they use this technique, it's like, wow, this really was a game changer in terms of being able to eliminate a lot of answers quickly, even if the passage was like super confusing. There's one like I gave like a super crazy expert, and he was like, "This is the most confusing passage," and then I taught this technique, and really transformed it. When I say crazy expert, like someone who was an incredibly good reader, but found that particular hard passage incredibly hard. So same for me. Like if it was something really like abstract, really weird language, just like breaking it down into some of this process of elimination can be super helpful. So, okay, so let's just look at it in more detail. Mary contends that the plan will not work. So now I have Mary has the opinion. That would be a descriptive passage, even though there's an argument. It's descriptive in terms of the answer will say present an argument. The verb will be like a more neutral verb, present. Say the passage says the plan will work. Now the author has the opinion. Now a verb like argue is going to be right. But a lot of times they'll be like half the verbs will be descriptive and half will be more argumentative. There's a little bit of nuance in terms of maybe there's a few verbs that could go either way, like explain, explain potentially could be a little bit more descriptive, but most of them are going to be like pretty clear cut. And I'd say, yeah, it's probably a higher percentage of the passages are more descriptive. But there's a decent number that are argumentative. It might be like 25, 75, something like that. Um, so yeah, actually, and let's see, will work. Will work, correct. Sorry. Oh, the plan will work. Yeah, the plan will work. Mary contends that the plan will work. Yeah. So there's a question in the chat. I'm not sure. Maybe I misspoke. Yeah. Um, all right. So in the chat for this slide, I wanted everyone to take a stab at just these six and just put a argumentative, descriptive versus argumentative for the six, just in order, like if this would be D versus A. Just in the chat. Yep. And actually, sorry, let's do private chat. Let's do private chat just so people don't copy other people's work. Under the to field, you should be able to change it to me. Thank you. So this is two. Yeah, you can actually do them all at once if you want. Or I might jump in, but you can just start working on them. All right, looks like we got a decent range. Yeah, a bunch of people correct. Also, I think some mistakes. So good. Thank you for being active there in the chat. I'm going to go through them. Demonstrate that, maybe potential demonstrate that we have as that word. It's kind of signaling more of a argument, but if we look more detail here, it is actually argumentative. So this is argumentative, correct? I said the word but I meant and. Demonstrate that a theory that appeared to have been refuted should be reconsidered. The word should is signaling a proposal or a plan. So this is actually really common in critical reasoning, also reading comp, but probably even more common in critical reasoning to notice that that's a plan word. Yeah, I'd say both. But this is definitely argumentative in this word, and also demonstrate that, also pretty argumentative. Identify ways, that's more descriptive. Yeah. It's more like, okay, this person differed from their image. That's more of a describing something. Argue that, that's pretty clear, argumentative. Presenting a theory, descriptive. Challenging, that's pretty clear, that's argumentative. And describing, that's decently clear, descriptive. Any questions on any of that? Maybe the least clear cut ones maybe were A and B, or the first two. Yeah, it can kind of depend on context. Yeah, that's a good question. So are the verbs always descriptive, argumentative? I mean, I'd say argue and challenge are more clear cut, argumentative. Present and describe are more descriptive, and I think demonstrate that is pretty clear cut, argumentative. I think those bottom four are more the common ones. Demonstrate and identify. I think identify, yeah, I mean, identify something as more like describe. So I'd say these are pretty clear cut. It could potentially depend slightly on the context. Yeah, a difference between someone asked about 1 verse 6. Demonstrate. So a more clear cut thing is this word should. This should is really clear cut. It starts with this verb, but you're demonstrating that something. To demonstrate something is to show something, which is, and to show something is a little bit more more of an argument. To show something, like I'm going to show you why I'm right. That's kind of, I'm going to show you why something should be reconsidered. So yeah, prove, exactly. So the context here is prove, exactly. That's very good in the chat. Yeah, thank you. So it could depend a little bit on context. Yeah. Yeah, like a word like explain maybe is a little bit more depending on context. So if it was explain that Joe is wrong, explain why Joe is wrong, then that's more of an argument. If it's more, explain could be kind of go a little bit both ways. Yeah. And then this describing a process, that's pretty descriptive. All right, so we talked about the first 2 sentences and then following sentences. So we're going to actually try this one. I'm going to put it in the poll in the chat, maybe just a short time, a little over a minute. And I'll have the poll up here in a sec, and you can give this one a try. It's okay if you run out of time. We're just going to try and make the most of our time, so no worries. So I know I didn't give you a lot of time. 12-second warning. Just do your best of those answer choices. It's okay if you miss it. Cool. So I think that was, yeah, definitely maybe not quite enough time. I just kind of wanted to get a sense where things shook out. It looks like most people were able to get B, and I will explain here like how we can get it pretty quickly. So especially as you get used to this kind of a pattern that comes up, it is reasonably common. So we have this structure I talked about. Hypochondria is commonly believed to be. So you have this commonly believed. That's our myth structure, and then we have this however, which is quite common. Like it kind of foreshadows when you have a common belief that this however will follow. I mean, you still got to read it, but it's kind of like when I see this, actually, I'm gonna like immediately think the author's likely to pivot because it just kind of it's foreshadowing. And then so it's correcting correcting sounds good. A common misconception sounds good. And then so we have these 2 parts are good. Answer is B, by the way. And here. And then is this part right? About the prevalence of a certain condition, we can check that. Hypochondria, yeah, it is a condition. And then it actually, in the second paragraph, we're going to check this too. An examination, so it's going to go into some more evidence, just how prevalent the condition has been. So it is about the prevalence of a certain condition. So it's matching up with the key points in both paragraphs. This would be on, actually, I think statistically, it feels easier, relatively easier, but I believe it was like a little bit more of like a 4.5 out of 10, maybe, ish. But if you're used to it, I think statistically it was like 75% accurate, something like that, which would maybe be like a 4 out of 10. Yeah, one thing about difficulty. No, this wasn't bold. This was just kind of an example, actually. Yeah, just to show you like the first 2 sentences. Well, I will say the bold sentences there can be highlighted. There can be bold on the critical reasoning or highlighting on the reading comp, but it wouldn't be like this. No, this was just like as an example. Yeah. All right, this other trap is too narrow. It must capture the primary purpose of the whole passage. So on this last one, trying to remember if there were any other too narrow traps. We'll definitely see some on the others. Yeah, I mean, this C is actually kind of a too narrow trap. I think, yeah, not too many people chose that, but demonstrate people have long been aware of the prevalence. It does kind of say that here, but that's not the main point. So yeah, the answer was B, correct. Yep. So there could be some things that are kind of true. Like this says people have long been aware. It says, the literary works show that it's been prevalent, and then maybe there's some evidence about that. People were aware of it. I mean, it's not really doing that, but even if it did, it really wouldn't be the main point because we have to capture this first paragraph main idea that there's a myth. So here's this other example. Let's say the passage is the team of researchers gain key insights. Well, that seems like a main point, but then it's about part about human migration by building a boat. Okay. Well, actually, maybe this part is like kind of the main idea, and then this is more the details. The by building a boat. If our answer just connected to building a boat, that's way too narrow. That's more of like the details. We need to capture this main idea, gain key insights about human migration. All right, I'm going to have you try one more. Just as a reminder, we're going to use our verbs to help us. And I'll have you try that one. I'll have the timer up in a sec here. This time I'll give like 2.5 minutes. Just do your best in that time. You may not need to go into a ton of detail. All right, looks like, yeah, most people got a bunch of answers still coming in. I'll give it a few more seconds to finish submitting. Yeah. All right. So we'll go through it here. Looks like most people chose D, which is very good. Yeah, present different positions. It is descriptive. So we start off here. And actually, it's not just the first sentence, but there has often been vigorous debate. The internet's not an exception, so it's implying there will be debate. And then we get author Nicholas Carr contends that, and then he has a strong opinion. Internet's degrading human intelligence, and then we go into all this detail. Carr notes that. We have, for instance, a study. Carr finds it alarming. So we have all this opinion on Carr. Okay. But all this is supporting this main point that it's degrading human intelligence. And then here, in contrast, pretty clear cut. Many scholars challenge these concerns and say it's good. So it's basically bad versus good, pretty clear cut. Present different positions regarding the impact of internet on people. That's all good. And then a really fast way to eliminate. I did see some answers come in pretty quick, which was nice. Propose ways. Yeah, it's not proposing, it's not questioning, it's not evaluating, and it's really not explaining why. This is more argumentative too. Will inevitably misuse the internet. That's actually just something that's mentioned in the final sentence. It's just something that's acknowledged, but it's not explained, and it's not even the author saying it. So, and it would be too narrow. So, that one, so that one's pretty clear cut because a question came in about what distinguishes hard questions from easy ones. One thing on that is that how close are the wrong answers to right, or how tempting are the wrong answers? So one thing that makes this one easier is that the wrong answers we can eliminate more quickly and clear cut just by the verbs being wrong. Where we'll see one later where something that can make it challenging is if we read a definition too much into a certain word and think it means one thing, like potentially when it doesn't quite mean that, or we've misread something that's a little bit more nuanced. And I can kind of explain more detail. I think we'll actually jump into one here. Why not option 2? Yeah. So reiterate how to use the argumentative descriptive. Yeah. So the author doesn't have a strong opinion, him or herself. That's the key thing. Who's making the arguments? Okay. Many scholars challenge these concerns. So actually, someone asked to go back to the other slide. Let's just look at that other one real quick. The verbs are what the author is doing. Okay. So the passage says Mary contends that the plan will work. Who's making this opinion that the plan will work? It's Mary. The author is describing Mary's argument about the plan. So the correct answer would be presenting an argument, not argue. This because the author themselves is not making the argument. Say that so in this side here, the plan will work. Now the author is making the argument. So for this here, the author, these propose, question, evaluate are all argumentative verbs, but the author is saying Carr contends that, and many scholars challenge. So that's the author is not questioning the arguments. The author is describing the arguments. So someone asked, why is it not option B? Does that make more sense now? The word question means same as challenge. Yeah, okay, good. So one other question was tips to improve focus and read faster. Yeah, so the word like question would be like this other passage, like however, with the however. So if the second paragraph, if it said question 1 argument, so this could be right. If it was question and argument, if this paragraph was saying, however, Carr is wrong. That's my writing's a little sloppy here. But however, Carr is wrong, then this answer would be correct. Does that help? That's a great question. Yeah. What would match for a question? Yeah. Okay. Great question. I think I got most of the questions here. Something. Yeah. It is an interesting one. What distinguishes hard from easy ones? Some of it. I mean, a little bit as the passage itself could be particularly confusing. A lot of it is even if the passage was easier, the question itself could be hard based on the answer choices. Even just putting a lot of it has to do with how tempting are the traps. How much does it force you to pay really, really close attention? All right, so we are going to try a harder one here. pretty significantly harder, but not impossible. And I'll give a couple quick tips. So, well, as before, notice marker words. I would say also don't get bogged down by technical terms. So we have the PNF here, right? You can just think of that. It actually puts it in initials, but over here it says inverse myotatic reflex. Like a lot of times people get intimidated when they see these things. Just like you can think of that as IMR. This is PNF, this is DS, but don't get too caught up in all the details. Look for more main points. And this one I'll give a little bit longer. Let's try 3.6 minutes. All right, 15-second warning. Just do your best here if you're out of time. All right, really great job. I'm impressed. We had most people, a solid, good majority, choose B, which is right. And the stats on this one are pretty low. This is a hard question. It was only 54% correct, so nice work. So let's go why it's correct. Yeah. So we talked about argumentative versus descriptive. So this is actually a more complicated version of also a myth. There's a prevalent perception that's basically a common opinion among these amateur athletes, and then it's saying the best protocol ideal is to do so and so. However, these coaches question it, and they make the case that it's has inferior results than the timing of it. And it also says there's superior approaches. And then the second paragraph, this gets a little tricky. So it says there's a convincing body of research. It's necessary to discuss some caveats. Now, this word caveats is a little tricky because it can have multiple meanings. A few people did choose A, argue against. But here, the meaning of caveat could mean a warning, but it could also just mean kind of a, this is like somebody asked what makes it trickier. The word caveat could just mean some like things to be aware of, right? I actually, on the next slide, I put the actual definition. It could be a strong warning, potentially, a warning to prohibit, or it could just be an explanation that prevents misinterpretation, or it could be like kind of a modifying or cautionary detail. I mean, we can look at the context. He's just quoting some things about, you know, to be aware of. Oh, do it twice per week and don't use excessive force. So that's one reason why A is wrong. Another reason, we could just go back here actually. The author's not really arguing. Yeah, the author's not really arguing against. It's presenting, it's more descriptive of this opinion. And then it goes into like some other details about the PNF instructor. It says it's important to discuss some additional points about the method. So the author, it's like kind of a slight opinion, but not of like, the main point isn't the author's opinion. The author's saying, well, we should discuss some additional factors involved with this PNF method, and then quotes this other expert about it. So yeah, these strong verb ones, strong argumentative, argue against, advocate, it's not advocating. And then someone asked about C, too narrow. Yeah, so outline is pretty descriptive, so that's okay. But there's a couple issues. So actually, now we're getting into some more nuance and subtlety. A popular stretching method, you actually do have to be aware of singular versus plural. So if it says a method, you want to identify, okay, what is it talking about? It says problems. So presumably that's static stretching, but the whole rest of the passage, that's only one sentence about the static stretching, and then I guess a sentence or two saying it's not the best. But we talk about in a lot of detail about these other approaches. Now, this D, a couple people chose, mostly not, but this would be a too narrow because explaining the procedures, it actually does do that, these other procedures, but that's not the main point. So yeah, B would be too narrow, C would be too narrow. So someone asked about that. And it's not just one method. And the word problems is a bit of a distortion. It's like the word problem isn't quite right. It's saying its results inferior, and there's other, yeah, comparing like the quality of something it's not quite saying there's a problem. It's saying, I mean, maybe, but the word problem is maybe a little bit too strong. Maybe say this shirt's better than that shirt. It doesn't necessarily mean like they could be one's good, one's great. You know, it might not be exactly a problem. Let's see, there was a question about E, advocate. So it's not advocating necessarily because it's more, so now we're getting into descriptive versus argumentative. Yeah, it's the researchers are arguing about it. The main point is that the researchers and strength coaches are arguing against the myth. So that's why when we go back to B, it's discussing a contention and argument regarding approaches to stretching. And it is plural, multiple approaches, so that's good. To stretching is good. Discuss is a nice neutral verb. It is a contention. This call into question part here. Yeah, I'd say this is 700 plus. I would say so, yeah. I don't actually qualify things. I think more medium, hard, medium, easy, medium, hard. I know a lot of people call it 700 plus. I just don't really think that way because reality is there's been an interesting like case studies where to score a Q49, which is 2 from perfect on the classic version, there was a case study where someone did where they got all the easy, medium right based on GMAT club data, like level accuracy data, and 1 out of 12 correct on hard questions. So basically they saw out of 31 questions, minus 12, 19 easy and medium. And so, and they got those all right, and 1 out of 12 of the, 700 plus, right? So, I mean, that kind of gives some sense of like, well, if you get all the easy, medium, I mean, there is some nuance there of like, what is easy or medium? There were some hard mediums in there that he got right. She got right. But anyway, that's a side point. There was a question about C. Aren't the problems associated with? Yeah, so pluribus singular. You're right. It could be problems with one stretching method. The thing is what is all this doing? What is all this and this doing? This part and this part isn't the problems with a method. So the problem with that is it really should capture the passage as a whole. So problems, if you think the problems is right, then I mean this sentence is a decent match. Saying something superior in problems isn't quite the same, but what then you're left with this question is what is this rest of the passage doing? And it is discussing the contention.